Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. On this episode, we are talking to Norm Ashkenas, and he is the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for Robinhood. He has a really great mentality. He has this curious mind, this beginner's mindset that causes him to really try to prioritize understanding the business first and foremost. And I think you'll see throughout this conversation that example that he sets for his team allows for them to really build and be part of a next generation compliance program, not one that's viewed as the Office of No, but rather one that's actually adding value to the organization. So hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
All right, so welcome to the Ethics Experts. Been excited to get you on here.
I'm excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about ethics. Not everyone finds it exciting, but I do.
Well, those who matter do. Those who matter do find it very exciting. So Norm, I always like to kind of start with, what was your childhood like? What kind of kid were you growing up? Nobody wants to get into ethics and compliance when they're 8 years old running around their neighborhood, and yet all of us find ourselves here today. So what was that like for you growing up?
I think you're right. Nobody does want to get into ethics and compliance, but to be candid, I did always believe in fairness. I don't know that that's the words I put on it, but if I was playing a game, I wanted to know what the rules were, and I wanted everyone to follow the rules. If there weren't rules, fine. If we're making it up, it's fine. But I was one of those kids like, okay, how are we playing this? What is everyone supposed to do? Why are you not following the rules? That was part of it. But I think that I don't know that that's what led me to compliance, but I think more it's, as a kid, I was a voracious reader. I read pretty much anything I could get my hands on. After it was bedtime, I was under the covers with a flashlight reading. If you're going to get in trouble for something, it should be reading, I guess is my thought. But that's really what I was doing. And I always asked a lot of questions and challenged everything. I wanted to know the why on everything, and maybe more than some, and maybe more than my parents bargained for. Ultimately, I wasn't a bad kid, but I was always saying, why am I doing this? Or why can't I do that? Or why is that the way it is? And I will say that is part of what compliance and ethics is, to be honest with you.
Isn't that funny how that's like in your DNA or something? Like that shows up in a kid. I mean, I have 3 kids, and their personalities are so different. And it's like, they've been that way from day one, and they'll probably be that way when they're 80. You know what I mean?
Were you that way?
I think whatever I am right now is how I've always kind of been. I was that way. Really kind of trying to see where the line is on stuff. Like where's the actual line? Because everybody kind of says the line is here, and it's like, it's not actually there. Where is it really? So I was a little bit of a line pusher, and I guess I still am to some degree. What was your path into compliance? What kind of got you into this pool that we're all swimming in?
So first, it wasn't intentional. I don't think I knew what compliance was. There's an old Depeche Mode song from the 80s with compliance in it somewhere. That's probably the only time I heard the word until I actually, got into the working world, and probably got much further along in the 90s. I mean, I started off as a lawyer. I was a litigator. I was doing arbitration work. I was doing legal advice, regulatory advice, all kinds of that kind of work for a long time. And, compliance was something that it was the group that you went to say, can I have these reports? Because I got to go try a case. I didn't think of it much more than that, really, until I had a few colleagues move into that department at probably 3 firms ago, and started to learn what they were doing. And one of them said, hey, I was a little burnt out doing litigation arbitration in the 90s at a certain point, and they kind of said, you should try this out. We need somebody to start writing policies, writing procedures. And I won't go into huge detail, but really when I was doing a lot of my legal work and defending firms and reps, I was always very interested in, why did things go wrong? What was the cause of this? I wasn't, it'll be sacrilegious as a lawyer, but I wasn't as excited about the cases, about the case law and the precedents. Yes, it was important to write the briefs, but I would understand, why did this go wrong? Was this Was the product inherently bad? Was this a rep who was inherently bad, or had they not been trained well, or was it just not communicated well, or like what was the problem that was there? And I would dig into that. I felt it would help me defend the cases. And as I did that, I realized that was much more of an interest. And as I talked to people about compliance, it kind of felt like that's what compliance was doing. And that's a role opened up. I interviewed with the CCO at this a few firms ago. And I don't know if this was good or bad. I might have blown the interview, but she was asking me what I thought compliance was like. And I, on the spot, said, I feel like right now in the legal side, there's a parade and there are marching bands and there are elephants and there are horses and there are drummers and everybody. And then there's this huge mess left behind. And someone's got to clean it up. And what the litigators are doing and the arbitrating lawyers are doing is cleaning up the mess after the parade and reg lawyers. And compliance to me, I described, felt like maybe you're putting diapers on the horses and the elephants.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not going to have an elephant in the parade.
Walking with the trash can behind the elephant, maybe. Yeah.
Right. Or maybe you're feeding better food to these animals so there's less of a mess. And maybe the marching band can't have streamers all the time. So it really felt to me like let's get ahead of the problem and let's try to avoid it. And I know that's a long description, but that's really how I found myself in compliance. And I walked out of the interview thinking, there's no way I get the job. I just described cleaning up, stuff. And
yeah, as soon as you walked out of the room, she was like, he gets it.
I didn't know that at the time, but really it is. So that is really how I ended up in compliance. It wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened. And that's 20 plus years ago, and I've loved it ever since.
So I want to go back to the litigation days and the arbitration days. Mm-hmm. What was it about that? You said you kind of had this sort of inkling or this instinct to focus on this sort of root cause analysis thinking. But what was it about that role that was attractive to you, either when you were in law school trying to figure out which path you were going to take out of it, or once you were in that kind of role that really kind of satiated you? What was it about litigation that you liked?
I liked the action. I mean, in law school, I did moot court as one of the things in law school. I had a trial advocacy class. I did moot court. I ended up doing some competitions, and I was one of the editors on the moot court board. And I really enjoyed that aspect of things. And it felt like a lot more action than pushing documents and reading with heads down. And I think that is really how it felt like. That's where the action was. And it was really an effort. You have a give and take. There's arguing going on, obviously. You're trying to sleuth out stuff. You're questioning witnesses to see what they're going to say, trying to figure out how to ask them questions. And I found that really challenging and interesting. And that felt much more satisfying to some others. But to be honest with you, as I'm sure any of my former colleagues know, you're not spending a huge amount of time actually doing that. Right. You're doing a lot more of that prep work. And oftentimes you're settling right before the case begins, or you're settling halfway through. And that just felt very dissatisfying to me. And you would certainly do it if it was best for your client. But once I'm in, I want to be in on the action. I want to do it. I'm fully prepped. Let's go. It'd almost be like if you said, okay, we're done with the interview now. I think we've had enough, and I'd feel dissatisfied. That's how I would describe it to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there's a certain sort of, completionism that kind of leads to that satisfaction that many times you're not able to do, in that realm. It's like if you're a movie director and you just love opening night, it's like there's a lot of stuff that goes in to that one sort of brief opening night, like in terms of like making a movie. You know what I'm saying? There's all the planning, there's all the filming, and then opening night is really just kind of a flash in the pan in many ways. That action is a lot of fun, and it can be satisfying to be in that action. What about it? Let's go back to that first role, that first compliance role. You walked out of the interview and you were like, there's no way I got that job. Then you did end up getting the job. What overlap did you see in terms of like what fed you in that role? What made you, and like, when did that light bulb come on that you were like, okay, I'm in the right place?
Well, initially I was writing WSPs. I was creating procedures for trading desks and helping steer internal continuing ed and things like that. And I realized I was learning a lot because in order to write a WSP or just a standard procedure for a trading desk, you've got to learn what are they trading, how are they trading it, who are the counterparties, what are the controls, like learn everything about how it works and talk to a number of people to ask them how they do it and then compare that to how the regulators say you should do it and start crafting all that. And that, that felt it was really, again, I started learning a lot very quickly. And certainly on the legal side, you dive in and learn an issue and then you move to the next one. Here, it just felt like piling on and learning the issues. And at a certain point, I was also asked to take on the Office of Supervisory Jurisdiction audits, the compliance audits for financial services. And in that case, certainly you don't want to have that reputation of being the gotcha people. But again, from my standpoint, the thought was as I worked with the team and talked to the business leaders, the goal here was to help them run their offices better and to have compliance find things that are going wrong before they permeate, or more importantly, before a regulator finds it. But you don't want to make the experience really negative for people. So it's really figuring out how to have them learn something as well and come up with some objective measures for who's doing better than others. And, those are all things that were happening in about a 12 to 18 month period. And that started to really dig me in to say, there's a lot of things I can do in this space as I continue to grow. It just felt like there was no end to the things you could do is the best way to describe it. And that, at some point, could I have gone back to the legal side? Could I still do that? Maybe, but my legal training is infused into everything I do, and that certainly helps me think about it. And that's been my perspective throughout.
I've done 200 plus of these conversations, of these episodes. And there's this interesting sort of trend I've seen, or this interesting pattern I've seen around compliance officers who came out of litigation. And it's like an ability to get smart on something quickly. And it's an ability to like find an angle quickly and understand that at some level there's a negotiation happening. Right. It's kind of an implicit negotiation. I mean, what you kind of described is I got to talk to a bunch of people and I have to understand how this trading desk works. And I have to ultimately get people to like adopt this standard procedure in order to, prevent something bad from happening in the future or drive more efficiency in the program. Were those some things that it sounds like those are some things that you continue to like lean on today to drive your own program forward and probably have kind of across your various experiences?
I think that's a fair assessment. And again, you've had the benefit of talking to, it sounds like, hundreds of people on this topic. And it is, you have to be curious. You have to really want to learn new things every day. And I often do. Even before joining Robinhood, I was learning new things every day. And that desire to dig in there, apply your knowledge set. And look, you don't have to have a legal background. MBAs do really well in compliance as well if they've had that experience of how do I operate something and how does it not work properly and how do I build a strategy to execute things. There's a variety of paths. Legal over the last 15 years has become one of the primary ones, but not the exclusive one.
Well, yeah. And I think what you're talking about is like, if you're a smart person who's curious, who kind of has an eye for quality, you can find a home here at some level.
Yeah, I'm always looking to improve things. It's sometimes it can cause issues with some family members at times because I walk into a situation, it could be a restaurant, it could be a store, and I'll see something that's not running well. And I'll say, they shouldn't be doing it this way. They could do it this way. And then a lot more people could be served faster. Or I don't understand why they're doing this. And I get this funny look and say, can you turn off your brain and just sit in line like everybody else?
Order the appetizers, will you?
Just wait in line, please. But that is kind of what happens. And you probably have used this analogy. I don't know if it's chicken or egg. Do we do this because that's who we are, or do we become this way because we do this? I don't know the answer to that. Could be both.
Yeah, it's like an eye for optimizing. It's an eye for kind of finding problems, and it's an eye for, just improving things. Do you think you've always been that way, or is that something that you kind of realized that you were good at and realized it was unique? I'm kind of fascinated by this thing of like strengths and weaknesses and the extent to which who we are is a function of like what we end up sort of oversampling or over kind of leaning into as we get success in something. You know what I mean? Like, um, and many times those things end up becoming things that we define ourselves by. Somebody who's like an A student, they're probably like as an infant, they're not an A student. Obviously, they're not even in school. But at some point, there's some kind of a feedback loop, or there's some kind of like satiation that comes from, oh wow, I'm smart. Okay, I define myself as being smart, and then they sort of like go off on that trajectory. As you reflect back on your own life, do you feel like that's something that you've seen as like a superpower that you've leaned into, or is it something that you've just sort of like looked back and said, oh wow, I guess I'm this way?
I think it's probably more the latter, that I realized I was that way. I think I mean, even going, I know we started at childhood. Everything starts and ends with childhood. We know that, but I was always pushed in a way to say, "Have you done your best?" It wasn't, "Is it perfect?" It's, "Have you
Mm,
done the best you can do?" And if you haven't, and sometimes you're a kid, you want to say you have, and you realize you can't, or your parents see it and realize you're about to lie and say, "Don't answer the question, just go redo it." I had those moments where I was pushed to do that. And that really became, you know, part of how I drove myself. I had internal motivation after that to say, can I do this better? Can I jump higher by an inch in whatever thing I'm doing? Can I improve this? And, it's sort of, I didn't realize it until I was looking back many years later. And it's really, I guess it in part is a superpower. And what I'll also say is at one point in my career, I had a senior executive who I'd been working for, I don't know, 5, 6 months at another firm, who said, "Do you know what your brand is?" This is like, "Not really. What is my brand?" And I was expecting something terrible. And, you can edit this or not, but he said, "You're known as somebody who just gets shit done. It may not, whatever it is, you take it and you get it done. And if you don't think it's done right, you do it again." He said, "That's your brand." And I said, "All right, I guess I'll take that. Is
that's a
it a
good brand.
negative or
Yeah.
is it a negative or a positive?" I had to ask that question because it implied otherwise. But that is kind of what happens there. Because sometimes it's you get it done, but you get it done right.
Man, that's a strong brand. I wish I had a brand like that.
I,
Um,
I'm sure you do.
all right. Well, I'll give you my wife's number and you can share that with her in our brief interaction. So in that first job, there was a bunch of stuff that seemed super interesting. What was surprising about the job? Like nothing ever, totally fits our expectations, right? Sometimes you're a little bit right, you're a little bit wrong. What were some of the surprising things, or what were some of the things that were like surprisingly hard to do that you thought would maybe be easier or something like that?
You mean first compliance job?
Yeah, yeah. Just
Yeah,
you were doing litigation and you're stepping
yeah,
into this new realm. You
yeah.
talked a little bit about what you loved about it and the kind of interesting aspects of figuring out,
Hmm.
how the
Certainly.
machine works or something. But there's always, it's called work, and there's frustrations and there's surprising things to the negative. What were some of those things?
Well, I think it's that, at least initially, you don't have. I mentioned that moment when you go to trial or go to arbitration or do a testimony representing somebody. You have that denouement when you get there, that big climax moment. But you don't get that same, maybe you don't get that same feeling when you've completed a desk procedure. It doesn't feel as momentous. So that was kind of the, okay, I get it. I accomplished something. I've delivered it, but it didn't feel, at least initially, as exciting until suddenly I looked and realized, oh, we've created a whole array of these things.
Mm,
Or at one point, I worked with somebody from the parent company where I was to overhaul the branch audit program and make it more, I'd say, risk targeted properly, create more objectivity and the like. And at the end of that, said, "Wow, we've done something really new here," but during the process, it feels like you're not, because it's months. So, those were. It was surprising that it took so long to slog through it. And yes, Prep could be months and months or an arbitration, but you had various time frames you knew. Here sometimes it felt like progress was sideways till you get ahead.
Yeah, it's like it's just one foot in front of the other. It's one foot in front of the other, and you're looking down at the trail, and it's not until you kind of pick your head up and look over your shoulder, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I've come so far!" Or "Wow, we're so much higher. This is a new view I haven't even seen before."
Exactly. Exactly.
So, as you've been in the compliance game, you've probably developed some like major tools. Like every craftsman has his favorite tool, you know. What are and I I'm kind of using that as a metaphor for your like philosophies around what a strong compliance program should be and the impact that a strong ethics and compliance program should have on the business. What are some of those sort of foundational perspectives or frameworks or philosophies that you've developed over the years?
So I think it starts, I used the word curiosity earlier, but you've got to be curious. You've got to ask a lot of questions. And maybe it feels like I'm doing my development 360 here, but I've also gotten feedback in the past to say, you ask a lot of questions. You make people feel like they're being cross-examined sometimes. And my response is, well, it's kind of unfair. You happen to know I'm a lawyer, so you use that phrase.
Yeah,
If I wasn't a lawyer, maybe you'd call me a investigative reporter. Maybe you'd say I'm a doctor. It's just, or a scientist. You ask lots of questions. And I think the root of it is understanding, being curious, asking questions and having understanding. That's really, everything has to build from there because ethics is not a check the box exercise. Compliance isn't either. And in order to build a program successfully or enhance one, you have to learn what the environment is. I mean, that's something I had to do when I came into Robinhood. It was an entirely different environment moving into a technology company from TradFi, as it's called, traditional financial services. I had to realize, okay, how do things work here? Let me start asking people how they think and how they do things. And that's what everyone in compliance should do. It shouldn't be just me. That's what successful people do. And even if you just use the narrower ethic or broader ethic lens, I should say, what's somebody's motivations?
Right.
And you don't learn them until you ask questions or ask people to give them information. How do they get paid? What's the promotion? What are the promotion incentives for people? What's the environment like? Again, I feel like a broken record, but it's curiosity and asking questions. That's what makes you hyper successful in compliance.
Yeah, and that's probably true in kind of everything, but maybe particularly more so in compliance because we're putting these guardrails on the road. And, I often say there's nothing more dangerous than a person who's seen it all. Oh, I already know what this person's motivation is. And, oh, I already know how this works. I've already seen this 1,000 times. I mean, you haven't. And things are changing all the time. And the player, the pieces on the board are different in different situations. How do you keep that sort of curiosity, that sort of beginner's mind, A, and then B, I'd like you to speak to also I find a lot of folks are not willing to ask those questions due to some kind of an insecurity. They don't want to look stupid. They think that, and I've been guilty of this throughout, my life in various, at various times. How do you keep that sort of prioritization of actually understanding it for yourself higher than the self-preservation of ego, for example?
I didn't develop that myself. When you're earlier in your career, you're afraid. Well, when you just start out, you don't know anything. And I think most people know that. But then you get to a certain degree of competence, and then you're afraid people are going to think you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
Then you get to your point further along, and you could risk being well, now everybody thinks I know everything, and I think I know everything. And I think I learned from people that you have to be a bit low ego on things. And sometimes it's how you ask the questions. I had a leader I worked with at one point years ago who used to say, okay, I pretend I'm Jimmy the Dunce. Explain this to me that way. I don't really understand. And this was somebody who was pretty senior in an organization with 25 years of business experience. And they would say things like that. Or I will sometimes ask the question to say, can you help me understand this a little better? Because if you just assume, or if you have a question, oftentimes other people have the same question
Right.
and they're afraid to ask the question. And sometimes that is a role compliance can play as well. You just have to get over that leap of thinking asking a question where there were 12 people who are nodding their heads up and down like they understand might make you seem like you're lesser. And usually, if you have the question, the others do as well, because you wouldn't be in the room if you weren't as smart as everybody else there. That's what the method I have found.
Yeah, I think that's the right mindset. I mean, so much of the way we show up and the impact we have is a function of our mindset. And if we're in that sort of self-focused, self-preservation mode where you don't want to, where your brand of competence, whatever, is threatened, um, you know, you have to understand it. You just have to understand how the machine works if you're going to actually add any value to it. And I think it's incumbent on us, regardless of our role or our level, to add value to whatever system we're a part of. And it's hard to add value to something if you don't actually understand it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And look, I've seen business, not just compliance, but business people not succeed at that. I've been in
100%.
environments where they're all just nodding their head and saying yes. It's one of the things I like about where I am is as smart as the people I work with are at Robinhood, they're pretty low ego and love to ask questions and sometimes say, I don't understand this at all. Can you back up and explain that to me? And it's kind of cool when you're hearing that from everyone in the room. And then we've all been in environments where it's not encouraged. You shouldn't ask any questions. You might embarrass somebody. And that's not a healthy environment.
Yeah. And, I think like earlier in my career, I felt, oh, I should know this. And if I act like I don't, if I show that I don't know it, then it's proof that I like don't deserve to like be in the role. I mean, maybe that's that kind of imposter syndrome that we all feel or that I felt throughout my career in various different times, sort of rearing its head. And I think the more we listen to that voice, the less effective we end up being, the less growth we end up kind of experiencing. And I think to your point, the fact that you got the job, the fact that you're in the room is proof enough that you deserve to be there. Now the game is really understanding it so that you can add the value to whatever the project is or the agenda or the initiative.
Yeah, look, I'm sure you hadn't done a podcast before you did a podcast.
That's
And you
exactly.
became very comfortable asking many questions of many people. And my guess is you probably learned something from every conversation. And other people might say, doesn't it get boring after you've done 137 of those? And my assumption is the answer is no. And I don't
It's
mean to
not.
interview you, but to me, it's an exchange.
Yeah, and I learned so much from every conversation. It's interesting though to kind of see that that awareness come up in people. Like I have a daughter, my youngest daughter. She just turned 7, and when a baby is learning to walk, they're not worried about looking stupid. They're not looking, they're not worried about feeling stupid and, oh, look, I look like a fool, I'm falling over. That's not even in their mind. But at some point, there's this sort of outward focus, and we're more concerned about how we're perceived and so forth. And I'm starting to see my daughter, she's 7 years old. Like I said, I'm starting to see the inklings of that. And it's almost like a falling away of like innocence or something. And we end up, I wasted so much time sort of living in the minds of those around me. And I had no true view into like how people thought. I just sort of thought this is how they thought. And I was just so worried about avoiding it. And it's like almost returning back to that sort of beginner's mindset allows for way less wasted calories and way more kind of application of whatever gifts I might be imbued with.
Yeah, that's well said. It feels like we're having a therapy discussion. That's what it
Yeah, I'm
feels
about to
like.
lay down here in a second. If you have a notepad, that would be great.
Or vice
Um,
versa. We'll just get couches.
So I want to talk about that transition into Robinhood and that, you move from a traditional financial advisor into a tech company. What was surprising about that move? What were some of your early learnings, and what were some of the kind of characteristics of the company that were just so much different than what you had experienced before?
Well, I think it really was this perception. The phrase fintech is what was bubbling up in 17, 18, 19, 20. And, I thought I was going to a fintech because that's what everyone called Robinhood. I realized, it took me maybe a month or two to realize I wasn't at a fintech. I spent a long time at Fidelity. They spend billions of dollars a year on technology developments imbued in what they do. Pick another large bank or a healthcare company. They're doing that as well. fintech is kind of just is. I was going to a tech company, and that's really it took me, as I said, a month or so to realize this is a tech company, and the product set and the customer set is in financial services, but that was the DNA of the company. It has an engineering mindset and a mindset of user instead of customer, and how do we iterate and how do we launch something and then scale it over time and then have quick scaling and the like. And once I got to that moment to realize that's how people are thinking, it enabled me to have some different conversations that I've been having before. And, I mentioned earlier talking to people, what's somebody's motivation? What's the motivation, for somebody who's in a technology company as opposed to somebody who is selling bonds or
Yeah.
creating those? It's a different view. And I think that was very helpful for me to do that. And I came, back in 2020 at a time where the company had been, growing massively quickly. And we really needed to build out and scale a full stack compliance program to cover the company we were and we're going to become, as opposed to the smaller tech company we had been. So that's really the best way to describe it.
Did you, was that like a refreshing change, that different mindset, that iteration mindset, that sort of, a tech company is very fast, they're famously, whatever it is, what is it, like break stuff and grow or something? You know what I'm talking about? Like move fast and break stuff is the quote, which is probably not, a banner in most sort of like traditional, old economy companies, whatever you want to call them. How did you feel on that sort of smaller, faster, ship?
Well, I think so. I know it's interesting. When I joined, there were over 10 million customers, and we're well over 26 million now. And the scale of 10 million plus customers at the time seemed pretty large.
Yeah.
But with a team of, I don't know, 1,100, 1,200 people when I got there, and it was tech first. I think move fast, break things is the phrase people use. But if you're in a highly regulated industry, defense, pharmaceuticals, biotech, financial services, that doesn't really work for the customers, and it doesn't work for your regulators and governing bodies. And I think it was interesting trying to balance the two.
Yeah.
And really, my goal coming in, I don't think anybody ever said to me, move fast and break things. That's really from the outside. From the inside, the conversation was more, we want to deliver more to our customers as quickly as possible. We want to scale it as quickly as possible. And, we don't want anything to get in the way of that we don't have to do to meet our obligations and make sure the customers have a good experience. And sort of, running with that, I would almost describe it as you're building the plane while it's flying at some extent. As you're building out an infrastructure, that's not what we're doing now, but that's kind of how it had been as many companies. And I think for us, it was really this concept of just taking the regulatory frame, the controls, compliance frames, and infusing them into the tech company without trying to turn it into a traditional old line financial services firm. I use old line loosely, but I couldn't turn it into something else. And all of us who came in, general counsel, the other senior lawyers and compliance people, the goal was to just bring more into it, but not transform it into something that it wasn't. And that was a really challenging balance to do that. And that's what we do every day. And it was really exciting to do that. And I feel we did something special by ensuring customers had this fabulous experience, and that all obligations were met, and that we could, give them everything they needed to have a positive experience and a positive outcome. No guarantees, of course.
Yes. And this is not financial advice. I think I kind of painted in too broad of a brushstroke, because to your point, there is that balance between it being sort of tech forward, but also highly regulated. And did you find that drive for innovation, for speed, for expansion, for growth, to be sort of mobilizing and like animating for the stuff that you were trying to do? Like I'm like back up a little context for this, is that in my experience, I know that you didn't join it at a startup phase, but tech companies in general tend to like bring in compliance a little bit too late, right? You're trying to kind of trying to catch lightning in a bottle, and then it takes off, and you're like, oh crap, we have to like do something. And I don't know the details at Robinhood per se, but it sounds like you were brought in to make sure that the growth that came was going to be sustainable growth that wasn't going to like lead to these unintended consequences. And you were kind of invited in. And I'm trying to contrast that against where a lot of compliance people feel in other industries or other kinds of companies where they're kind of over at this kiddie table. They're, check the box function, a bumper sticker on the car, whatever you want to call it. And they don't have the sort of freedom or the, I don't want to say agency, but the ability, let's say, given, the lack of endorsement from other leaders or from tone at the top or whatever, to like make the plays that they think that they need to make. So I'd like you to kind of talk a little bit about, that difference.
To be fair, we had already grown substantially. We had a compliance program and we grew substantially. And really, there was a desire to bring it up to the next level.
Yeah.
Obviously, Robin had had some challenges in the past. We're well behind us at this point, and we've, regardless of where we have been and where we are, we have a safety always value. And I know people see value and say, oh, values, they don't live them. But from the minute I came in, and even in my interviews with various executives coming in, I got a sense people wanted to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I had a remit to build. I wanted to really test out. I didn't have to leave, where I was before. I had to be comfortable coming in and saying, okay, do I have a remit here to staff up appropriately? Do I have great legal partners who have the same remit to build out what we need to set us up for the scale we have and where we want to grow? And will I have that support? Versus there are people, sometimes they say, go hire somebody, they've got a name, and bring them in from the kiddie table, but don't give them anything to eat. Right. Sit on the end there. From day one, I was plugged into everything. My team was plugged into everything. There was openness to building out governance processes, not ones that would slow things down too much. But as I described it, sometimes you've got to go a tad slower to go faster so you don't have to have rework, and really try to enable safe growth. And it's critical to have that support. And we've had that support. I've had it in my team from day one, from the top down. Again, you're at industries change, companies grow very quickly. And sometimes you just have to bring more people in, or bring people in who've had different experiences than you've had before, that can help you build towards, what you're going to be.
Yeah, that future vision. So how did you kind of test out if that remit to build, as you called it, was real? And what signals did you see? You obviously accepted the job. What signals did you see that kind of confirmed it for you?
I think it was just the openness to entertain my questions. I asked, in the interview process, I asked a lot of probing questions about, business model, about why we were talking to me as opposed to other people, what the need was, what the goals were. And really try to get a sense of who I'm talking to. And I was offered the opportunity to talk to as many executives as I wanted to, as many times as I wanted to throughout the process.
So that's a good sign.
That's a good sign. I mean, ultimately, you're taking a risk either way. But to me, it felt like an opportunity to jump into something that was entirely new. And, my own company and most companies back at the time were all talking about Robinhood. Like, everybody was talking about this company. Everyone had internal groups saying, how do we
replicate that? Yeah.
How do we get the 20-something customers and early 30s customers? How do we attract them and delight them? How are they doing it? Why can't we? So my thought was, well, they've got them and everyone's talking about them. And I've been asked to come in here and help build and scale and really, grab this generation of, I think the median age was 31 of customers at the time.
Wow.
And much more diverse than the customer base at other firms, and say, I'd be silly if I didn't jump at this chance to take everything I've learned and done and help build something new here and make it great. And that's really what the path has been for 5 years. I don't know that I expected 5 years, but it's it's been a great journey, and I continue to be energized by doing those new things. And that's so it's a long way of saying, I took a jump just like anybody else does when they take a new role, but I had a sense the culture was where I wanted to be. I had the support that I needed. And that, again, there were other experienced heads in there, and Vlad and Beju, the co-founders and CEOs at the time, smart as a whip, and they really wanted to do the right thing, and they wanted to put the customer's needs ahead of everything else. What else can we do for them? And how cheap or free can it be? And make us do it right. And that's really something you have to, test for as best you can, and then hope it works.
Back to the chicken and egg thing. Do you feel like that approach is a function of leadership, maybe being younger or just being in tune with the market? Or do you think the company has had to kind of find its way to do what you're talking about, given the sort of younger demographic that is that massive customer base of over 30 million people? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's an increased sort of sensitivity to inauthenticity. There's an increased desire or prioritization, I think, in people looking for a new job, people looking to buy products, to kind of tune into the values of the organization, or like, are the words that they espouse actually real? I think it's at least a different prioritization than like our grandfathers had when they were buying a lawnmower or whatever. Do you feel like it's just maybe too hard to kind of sort through? Where do you think the source of that is?
Well, I think every generation is going to say they were different than the one prior, and everyone's going to say you've got to talk to a different set of people differently, and you have to be their age to do it. I don't think it's, I don't think it's that. I do think, to your point, it's what's the zeitgeist? Are you moving with the zeitgeist? And there's a generation that is not mine, where people learn from each other. People don't want to, have somebody tell them what to do and go sit in a class. They want to, socialize, learn, reach out to experts, get it bite-sized, do things themselves. And it's almost a DIY. Give me tools, give me capabilities, let me learn on my own at my own pace, and, give it to me how I want it is the best way to describe it. And I don't think you have to necessarily be that age to understand that age. But it certainly can help because you've grown up that way. And look, I will tell you, for me, certainly a benefit. I had teenagers at the time when I joined, and I certainly very much enjoyed being able to throw slang at them that they were surprised
cool
that I
dad.
knew, or
you were the cool dad.
Or not really, because they'd say, you're not supposed to understand that, when I say that to my brother, sister, friend, whatever it is. So, but it does keep you in touch with that. And you have to same way you've got to contextualize and speak. And I'm going to be the geek and go back to compliance and ethics. You've got to talk to people and meet them where they are.
Right.
And they're not your grandparents anymore. And they're not going to have a loose leaf bound manual with cellophane on it sitting on a table. That's just not there. And they also don't want to sit and watch a 2-hour video. So you've got to figure out how do you get into that and talk to people differently, customers and employees, and everybody else.
I like how you said that you have to tune into the zeitgeist, and that zeitgeist is changing all the time. And that's obviously true kind of externally in the market, but it's true within the organization as well, because the cultural, winds kind of keep blowing and they keep moving. So that's an interesting sort of parallel to this like constant desire you have to optimize, and you can't optimize unless you're asking questions, and you can't ask questions unless you're tuning into like what's changing. It's kind of an interesting sort of through line in what you've been talking about. It sounds like when you were brought on to, help build the program, help take it to the next level, help kind of lay the foundation for the growth that was hopefully coming, which did come. And it sounds like you had an endorsement, or a remit to build, as you say. That's kind of akin to some kind of positional authority. And when I became a dad, and then again, like a fool, when I became a CEO, I thought like, okay, well, people are just going to listen to me because I have this title. And I very quickly realized that you have to say things a bunch of times. And the positional authority that comes along with being a CEO really kind of means nothing at some level. Thank goodness my team doesn't listen to this podcast, but it really doesn't mean anything. What actually matters is the kind of relational authority that you're able to establish. How did you retain sort of quote unquote authority to get things done, and not overly rely on the sort of positional authority that came from, the endorsement or the like remit to build that, you were given, so to speak, when you came into the company?
Well, I do want to sort of get away from the me because it's a we in this case. I mean, I have a large team that we continue to grow and scale all the time, and it's not a one person band. I can set the tone, I can be where I need to be, but I really need to empower the teams to do that. Putting that aside, for me, it's be out there. Don't sit in an office and issue policies and edicts or pronouncements or write a training in a box. I've always in my career believed in physically getting out there where people are. And, when I was in a full service firm, I'd go out and visit branch offices and call centers, not unannounced. I wasn't doing audits, but I'd tell them I was coming. And I would get back behind the front counter, go into the operations area and sit down with people and ask them, how do you do these check deposits? How do you do that? How do you do this? I'd go to the counter and see how they interact with customers and talk with them. Sit with call center reps. By the same token, at a firm that's not customer facing like this, I'm out there in our offices as much as I can be. And I'm walking the floor and plopping down in an open area with a sandwich or a snack or a drink and seeing who's coming by, or if people are, going to something, you go with them. And it's being present and being approachable is the best way to describe it, and not being the person in the room. You've got a really sharp suit on today. If I wear that to an all hands meeting at Robinhood, people are going to wonder, am I interviewing for a job, or did I just talk to the
how'd the interview go?
Or I could be talking to the SEC 10 minutes later. Who knows? But you've got to really, you've got to show people that you're part of the team, show the interest, show the approachability, and just be out there and be willing to just figure out the culture and have fun with everybody. And that's really what we try to do. And that's true for anybody. It's if you're in a situation where there are sales meetings happening, go to the sales meetings. There's a point where you're gonna not be there anymore, but that's okay. You've got to be there with people. Don't sit in your office. That's really the best way to describe it. Pre-COVID and post-COVID, and even during COVID, get out and see people.
Yeah, I love how you put that. And not only does that probably set like a good example to your team on what's most important, it also, kind of prevents you or prevents your team from kind of doing what I call kind of like ivory tower compliance. A lot of compliance teams and a lot of ethics teams, I've said, they feel like, they're a cost center and they don't have the remit to build, as you called it, or the true kind of endorsement. And they're like, we're just apart from the business. And to your point, if you want to be a part of the business, you got to be in the business, because this is a people business at the end of the day. And whatever the client ends up experiencing, whatever product they end up buying or whatever service they end up getting from any firm is really a function of all of these individual attitudes and, actions that are happening at the individual level, how those amalgamate together into that service provision,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other piece I'd add to that is you've also got to use empathy. I know empathy, ethics go together very much, but it's understand where someone's coming from, right? And, understand and assume good intent. I'm throwing out a lot of phrases here, but you do have to do that and understand where they're coming from, why they're there, and how they think. And to do that, you've got to spend time with people. And otherwise, you're going to be viewed, and I'll use the stereotype of compliance. Everyone calls you Dr. No. That's right. Somebody who's they assume that's what your job is, just to say no. Or eons ago, there was a product person who said, we'll never have a product review committee here because it's just a mechanism for a bunch of people to say no without accountability and just makes compliance happy. That's not what it's about. It's about understanding and enabling safe growth. And heck, if you say no to everything, well, then there's no business. And customers don't get any products, or they don't have anything they want from your company. So that's something we have to, as an industry, we work with regulators on as well. We have to talk to them to say, hey, get out and talk to the customers or talk to us. When I go talk to FINRA or the SEC or my legal colleagues and compliance ones, I'm representing 25, 26 million people who have a voice, and they need to understand how these folks think. And the same way that for me, internally, I've got to go out and talk to our employees, and they need to have a voice, and I need to understand where they're coming from. As much as I'd love everybody to do whatever compliance wants them to do and follow every policy, I know that's not realistic, but we just try different mechanisms to get them to do it. And yeah, there are frustrating moments where you say, why aren't they doing it? You've got 3 kids. I told you to go to bed. Why aren't you going to bed? Well, they
Right.
might be under the covers reading with a flashlight like I was. And you've got to understand what the motivation is.
Oh, that's a good point. It's a little bit baffling to me that people are still talking about the office of no. It's like I've talked to hundreds of compliance folks, hundreds of ethics folks, and so many of us have the same sentiment that you had, that we're here to enable the business, that we're here to add more value to the company by reducing sort of unnecessary risk, not all risk, to your point. Do you think it's just going to take time for this sort of perception of this ethics and compliance function to just change as there's sort of enough accumulation of positive interactions between, stakeholders and compliance departments sort of across the economy? Or like, why are we still, why is this brand, not for you in particular, but just in general for our function and for our profession, like why does it still persist?
Well, in some cases, we do it to ourselves because we're not necessarily training our compliance officers to have the soft skills and the empathy, which they're going to need more of in the future. Part of it is historically, there wasn't training for compliance per se. I mean, when I came in the business, compliance was not what it is today, and you couldn't go to compliance school. There started being certifications that are out there that are offered by third parties and nonprofits, and law schools now have compliance programs, and they can teach these skills.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there are some people who come in and they need guidance. And I'd add as well that if you don't have the tone from the top, so to speak, if you don't have the executive team owning ethics and compliance and telling everybody it's important, and not just saying, hey, listen to the compliance person. There's a scene from can't remember which Billions, where the compliance person is going to give a speech or somebody has to apologize to him. You don't want that situation, but you do want something where they're explaining it and they're humanizing it, and then you have to pick up the ball and you have to humanize it as well. And you've got to get out there and understand people are trying to do the right thing. You just need to help them understand it. And to your point, we're getting better at it. But, with AI and technology coming in, we're going to have to be even better than that, because everyone's going to say, well, why can't I just do what the AI says? And you've got to really get into the mindset that to sell compliance. It's really sales.
It is sales. Yeah. It's sales and it's influence, and it's kind of proving to people, because again, like no one's compelled to do anything. They have to decide to do it. And you can write all the policies in the world. People probably aren't going to read them. You can make all the trainings in the world. What matters is the behavior that actually happens in that gray, in those sort of pinch points when there are these competing priorities and these, competing incentives and all those things. That's actually where like the battleground is.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of wrapping up here, if you could kind of share one piece of advice to, the compliance community on how they can, or how we can really elevate and really better sell the value of compliance, or really better sort of demonstrate our value in our organizations at the sort of stakeholder level, what kind of advice would you share?
So one thing I've always done is try to treat my compliance teams as a business. Your department, oftentimes you don't have a profit line, but the other thing people say is compliance is just overhead, it's an expense.
Yeah, right.
But if you run it in a way where you're demonstrating the value, And sometimes demonstrating value is showing that you have for your operational things. Do you have capacity models? Do you have, the capability of projecting your needs in the future in an operationally sufficient way? Are you able to demonstrate that you're using the budget wisely and adding value? And marrying that with telling stories. Some of it is told for you. A regulator or a government agency did something horrible to another firm. You can look at that, do an evaluation, and say, here's what happened to somebody else. We have the same business. We've taken a look at it. And here's the things that we put in place with your partnership and support that have shown why this didn't happen to us. It's like connecting the dots for people that you can't always do. And then the other piece is we have to really humanize it, like recognize we are a business, we're part of it, we're human, and make it real for people and give them the whys on things. So don't spit out a rule and says rule XYZ.7 says you must do X. That's why you have to do it. Sometimes it's saying, here's why this rule is in place and what it's attempting to achieve. And this is how we have to implement it here and why. And I know that a customer doesn't want to read that thing, but it's required. And here's why it's required. And maybe you have some ideas how we can better tell them that information we need to put in front of them. And that's the best advice to compliance people is be flexible like that. And as I said, be curious, recognize that people are going to view you in a way that you may not want to be viewed, and try to change the tide on that. That's really what you need to do.
Well, and there's a lot of opportunity in that. If someone's expecting you to be a no and you instead are a flexible yes, let's figure out a way to get it done, that pattern interrupt can be very, very, very powerful in driving that influence forward. And something you said there was running the department like a business, and I think that's so smart. A business is just a collection of a bunch of businesses. It's a collection of a bunch of departments. And the more we can show up as business people that can connect to the objectives of the organization or show our value, that we're thinking about things in a smart sort of business-like way, the easier it is for people to see that value. And again, not to nerd out too much, but that thing you said about kind of telling the why and using storytelling, to your point, like any regulation that exists, any rule that exists, it exists for some reason. And that reason is usually some kind of story where something went wrong. And so providing that context allows for a bunch of rules or a stack of policies to move away from being perceived as just kind of arbitrary as like, oh, okay, I understand why this is important. It's right there for us, I get so excited in this industry because I think we all want ethical cultures. We all want businesses that are performing better in places that we're proud to work. And so much of that is really in our power to drive that influence flow forward into the company.
Yeah. And look, ethics has to be real. It's not a thing off on its own. It's got to be real and tangible, and you have to understand the why. Compliance is part of that. And I think having podcasts like this really helps. And having people tell stories in the company about real things and real people and humanizing it can help as well. So I appreciate being able to talk about it.
Yeah, I love doing this podcast. I love talking to next gen ethics and compliance officers. And Norm, you are absolutely that. So thank you so much for joining us on the Ethics Experts.
Thank you. Appreciate it.